There we are. Hey, welcome. It's Friday, and we're here in the Nutmeg Tavern. Woo! Another week gone by. I'm so happy. It's been a very busy week here at Townsends. Exciting week, as usual. And anyway, I am John Townsend, and this is the Nutmeg Tavern. We do this every Fridays whenever possible, whenever I'm not on the road, or even if I'm on the road, if I happen to be at a place where I can stop and do it on my phone. Anyway, we always have lots of fun, talk about different topics, lots of questions and answers, and the kind of news that's happened all over the week. So we've had a busy week here. And so who is here today? I am John Townsend, your host, and I've got the crew behind the scenes, but this time we're sadly lacking in crew members. Normally Ryan would be over here and he'd be stage managing and making drinks and all that. Ryan's out today, but hopefully we'll see Ryan next week. So we've got Aaron on the console making it all happen. In fact, he's going to be making it all happen because we don't even have anybody on the question box today. So Aaron is handling everything behind the scenes. So give Aaron a hand and be very kind to Aaron in the section. Be nice about asking questions and help him out there. And this will probably go a little bit slower today because we only have one person back there. If you've got questions, you can start asking them. He'll try to figure out how to keep track of those. But again, be understanding about what's happening there in the chat. I can't see it. He's the only guy there, and doing the questions and answers can be really.
I'm just
difficult.
glad most people are spelling my name correctly.
There you go. Most people are spelling Aaron's name.
Yeah.
So welcome. You know what's going on. We know what's going on. The drink for today. Well, because I don't have my bartender today, I am just drinking a wonderful 18th century style tea today, and enjoying it nicely.
Hey, wait a minute.
What?
What is that you got there?
Oh, that is do you see this nice new mug that I'm using? Makes the tea taste wonderful. Here's a version of the same mug, and it's got this wonderful Nutmeg Tavern theme on the front of it. These mugs are available on the website right now, and there's a very, very limited version or number of these. In fact, I intended to have a lot more of these brown ones than the white ones, so order kind of turned up backwards, and so we've got a lot of the white mugs. We got just a few of these guys. If you're interested in a Nutmeg Tavern mug, very limited numbers. Again, we generally do mugs occasionally, and there'll be different colors. This is the color this time. This white with blue, and the brown with a cool green blue thing over the top. Great mugs, the handmade in the United States. Then they apply the logo on here, or the design, which is actually a real very 18th century technique. Mugs like this, different taverns would have actual logo mugs in the 18th century, which is really interesting. So those are available on the website. Aaron's putting a link someplace.
Yeah, there's one in the description, and
one in the description.
Throw one in the chat.
Yeah. So if you're interested, those are there. Let's talk about this topic real quick. I want to get into this topic, and I'm going to talk about it for a little bit, and we can go to questions, and maybe we'll come back to the topic. And this topic sort of popped up. Number one, because how did it go last week? Was it loud?
Rude and clamorous.
Rude and clamorous was kind of the theme of last week's. And while I was doing in my readings and sort of rabbit trail readings this week, because I'm always kind of scattered in exactly what I'm researching in any particular week. I'll be researching some food and then about products and different material culture aspects in the 18th century. And then sometimes I'm just thinking on other products or other ideas. And I'll order books, and like 3 weeks later, the book will show up and I'll pop it open and boom, new rabbit trail. Off we go. So this week, I was kind of having that rude and clamorous idea in the background, and I ran into, I've got this book called The Shoemaker and the Tea Party. I got interested in Tea Party stuff because I was at the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum, went through that. That kind of connected some ideas that I really hadn't thought about before. So ran onto this idea of the Tea Party, and then I was looking at the kind of the roots of the Tea Party. Actually, before the tea tax, there are roots of the Tea Party that keep going back all the way to Plymouth Plantation, which is pretty funny. So we heard a story when we were at Plymouth Plantation. We were just wandering around the village, just getting the story from the first person folks. They were in 1620, in their heads, in their minds, and talking to us as if it was 1624, 25. And they referenced this time in, I think it was 1623, when there was a fire in the town and it burnt down several of the houses. And at the time, when we were speaking to the interpreter, they were referencing the idea of these sailors creating too large of a fire in the fireplace and catching the house on fire. Well, as I was doing more research, I found out that actually that was the first reference to what was called Pope's Day, Pope's Night. They had a bunch of different terms for it in the time period. It was a colonial outworking of Guy Fawkes Day or Guy Fawkes Night or even Bonfire Night. So November 5th, there's this celebration in England, Great Britain, about the foiling of the gunpowder plot, and they would have celebrations. Well, this celebration kind of continued over into the New World. Now, of course, now we don't celebrate anything like that. Of course, because of its roots, we've kind of broken away from Britain, and so the concept of that sort of disappears after, say, 1776 or so. But there are roots of this same thing going on in New England, especially, and in that Boston area. So they would have these big celebrations. Well, that fire was because these sailors and other folks in the town had this big celebration on November 5th, and they caught some houses on fire. Well, that sounds pretty typical of the celebrations that continue on in the colonies. Boston was the heart of this sort of celebration, as it were. And early, say before 1720, it sounds like that it tended to be a bonfire kind of a thing. They'd have celebrations, have a big bonfire. It was just a time for celebrating. But it turned into something very rude and clamorous, after that. When we get after the 1720s, before about 1760, there were mobs, there were riots. In fact, they had riot acts. Laws that they put into place to quell the celebrations that were happening. There was a South End gang of people and a North End gang of people, and they had sort of floats. They would build, Guy Fawkes effigies or Pope effigies, and they'd march them through town, and then they would battle in the middle of town, hitting each other as much as possible, trying to steal the other group's Pope and then burn it. And it was something else. I mean, we really don't imagine this. And the kids sometimes would go through town early in the day, and they would do a trick or treat sort of thing. They would ask for guy money, right? Or Pope money. And if you didn't do that, they would play tricks on you and do all kinds of mean things. So it's sort of related to that. And of course, it's a very similar time of year, isn't it? So there's some really, really interesting connections with Guy Fawkes Day and all these things happening in the colonies before the Revolutionary War. And while that settles down in the 1760s, it also becomes the root of the people that caused the Boston Tea Party itself. They used some of this groundwork of grassroots groups that were fighting each other to actually come together and be part of the Boston Tea Party and throwing that tea into they just like, we need this mob, to do something. And so they used some of that, even though it was very... the Boston Tea Party was actually very, very, let's say, orchestrated and carefully put together. So a lot there, and I can read a little bit more about this specific sort of readings here in a little while, but I want to go ahead and let some questions happen. We'll see what Aaron's got in the question box. Go,
Yeah.
Aaron.
Yeah, not a lot related to the topic, but
Well, that's fine.
somebody kept saying, people were talking about, is that kind of like the origins of Halloween to an extent, like the tricking people or
I can
influenced by
only
that?
surmise that. I don't know if there are good, perfect connections that we can draw between those two, because I bet there's actually a bit of a gap. I haven't done a lot of Halloween research yet. I'm going to go ahead and do some of that because people have been asking for that. But I believe that we're going to find most of this, the kind of buildup of Halloween and the way we celebrate it today, at least in North America, as probably a 19th century thing that really comes together. The research I've done so far, this kind of celebration is as close as we get, and it dies away a good bit right after 1776. So it sounds like there's a gap there between the late 18th century, early 19th century, and probably it's mid 19th century, so 1850s, 60s, 70s, when sort of the romanticism of that period brings forth more celebration of things like Christmas and Halloween and similar holidays.
I want to do a couple donations real quick, and then I got a couple questions. But yeah,
Great.
start leaving questions. I'll
Yeah.
try to grab them, but I'm
he's
monitoring
he's
everything. So 2 donations from 80s, totally awesome.
Thank you.
Both for $2, so
Great,
$4 total. Visit Old Sturbridge Village.
Old Sturbridge Village, yeah.
Yeah. And then, wow, $50 from Will. Thank you
Thank
so
you, Will.
much.
Yeah.
Appreciate the channel and all the
Yeah.
recipes and history you guys provide. Thank you for the donation.
Yeah, thanks. It is really helpful in,
Yeah.
in what we do, so
Definitely.
super.
Let me... Okay. How did they forge their tools in the times of George Washington on the frontier?
Well, I mean, you may have seen, was it Monday's video with Jamie?
Yeah.
So,
Mondays.
Jamie was, he studies blacksmithing of the 18th century and reproduces pieces like that. Now, he specifically works on things like door hardware and kitchen utensils, but making tools is going to be very, very similar. Making gun parts, making tools, same kind of thing. You've got folks either working in the foundry, pouring metal, and tools themselves usually have to be forged up out of harder stuff, and because cast things don't tend to have a very good lifespan for tool type things, unless, of course, like today we have much better metallurgy and our castings are much better. In the 18th century, tools like that really had to be forged. So that kind of thing was happening a great deal in North America in the 18th century, although a lot of tools were imported. But so I'm not sure how to go about to answer that more than that. It was a major industry.
Sorry. I'm seeing a lot of comments about people grabbing mugs. Thank you so
great.
much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I'm
that.
glad you enjoy them. Everybody's been really excited here in the shop by how they turned out this time. It's a really neat logo to get onto these things, and the folks who make the mugs do such a great job. So I'm really happy with them.
Yeah. Thanks to all who have grabbed some.
Thank you.
So far. Okay. In the 18th century, did they grow horseradish and make it into a sauce that we would recognize?
There are some references to horseradish, but I don't know if they're really making them into sauces like we expect. And I have not cooked much with horseradish, or any that I can think of right off the top of my head. So I don't have any good sort of recipes off the top of my head. But I certainly don't remember seeing anything quite like that. But recipes for sauces don't show up as much. Mainly we see sort of references to the sauces and say, oh, horseradish will go good on this, but they don't tell you exactly how to make that sauce. They expect you to be able to create that sauce on your own. So it's possible that they had horseradishy kind of sauces that we would recognize. It's just we don't see those recipes popping up in the cookbooks per se.
This one is from Daniel Carlson, and he says, "Hey, it's me, Daniel, the intern at Plymouth. Do you remember me?"
Yes, I do. Very much so. Yeah, I think he was the guy who I was waiting in line at one of the food places, and he popped up, and so we met a lot of great folks at Plymouth. So hi to everyone at Plymouth Plantation.
Sorry, I'm trying to jump through each one. Any thoughts on 1790s coins? I've posted a few comments regarding discussing flowing hair and drape bust coins recently. I've been a collector of these for many years, and it's a passion of mine.
Yeah, the coinage. I mean, in general, coinage of the 18th century is a fascinating, wonderful topic. I've spent many hours in researching coinage, especially a couple of decades ago when I was putting together the coins that we use for our coin sets. We collected a lot of 18th century coins, a lot of British coinage, some small French coinage, German coinage, specifically to make up our pewter coin sets. We've stayed away from trying to do that with American coins because, the Treasury Department really kind of frowns on people making money these days as like that. So, but still, this coinage in the 18th century, very, very fascinating topic. And even the idea that Spanish, like pieces of 8, silver, what we would think of as a silver dollar, continues to stay legal tender in the United States until something like the 1850s. What happens with coinage and the amount of silver that's in it, and whether or not it immediately disappears from circulation, there's just so many very, very interesting things that happen with coinage in the 18th century because it's such an important part of the economy. Although there's a lot of paper money things going on within the 18th century too, and watching what happens with paper money and how it loses its value and how people deal with that from colony to colony, you can see why when they create the federal government, they really are very concerned with money, and they make very, very specific laws about what's happening with who can put out coinage, who can put out money, all those things. It's a very, very important topic.
Hannah Glass has a recipe for Hamburg sausage. Is that any relation to hamburgers? Her recipe is pretty different.
The interesting thing about Hannah Glass's cookbook, The Art of Cookery, is there are additions and additions and additions. It was printed for probably something like 50 years, and they continue to update it after she was dead. So I don't remember that particular recipe. So it could be in one of the later editions. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you on that one. You want me to give you some space here, Aaron?
I think we're doing okay. The questions are really good. Just trying to keep track of them all. This is interesting. Did people that didn't need to reload quickly still use matchlocks? Oh, I just missed that.
So the question has to do with the movement of, how quickly people changed the technology, especially on firearms. And so like Plymouth Plantation, those men had matchlock guns. But different kinds of technologies start to come in the late 17th century and especially the early 18th century, where we switch into different sorts of locks that use pyrite or flint to, set off the gunpowder. And something like by 1720 or so, flintlocks as we know them really come into the fore. And those are so much better than trying to use a matchlock that I'm pretty sure that matchlocks disappear very, very quickly. We've got such a small number of people here in the 17th century that would have brought matchlocks over that you don't see them continuing to stay on that long. They disappear pretty rapidly, and as the more people come to North America, they bring along with them all those new technologies. So you really don't see that many of the old technology lying around.
Hang on.
See, he's just not fast enough back there.
No, not
There's
at
a
all.
reason why we've got
Four people.
four people doing all the stuff.
Here's a good question. In the 18th century, how did people take care of their clothes, like washing them, ironing them, and keeping them free of wrinkles?
Well, they did a lot of washing and ironing, and they also did a lot of not washing things. So, there are some items that normally we think of washing clothing a lot, but that actually tends to wear clothing out very rapidly. It might even wear it out even more rapidly the way things were washed in the 18th century. I really, really am interested in doing a laundry episode, and Carol would be the perfect person for that. We tried to get together at different times to be able to do an episode on that, and I just really need to nail that down and get and it's probably a rather lengthy. She's got a lot of information on exactly how they did laundry in the 18th century. It's a really big, really fun topic, so got to cover that more. But to answer your question, you only wash your clothing when you really need to. You might do something like just air your shirt out. So that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of layers in 18th century clothing. You've got a shirt on, which is your underwear. There's nothing on underneath that. And that's why it's a long garment coming down mid-thigh or even longer, because it's doing multiple jobs there. So you might take your shirt off and let that one air out. You put on a fresh shirt, which is just one you had airing out. And then maybe once a week you'd have your clothing washed, and you likely would not wash your waistcoat. You especially wouldn't wash your coat. Those things are usually brushed off. So you brush the dirt off of them, because washing them really takes all those fibers out very rapidly. You'll wear out your outer clothing by washing it too often. And they had all kinds of very interesting technology for washing their clothes that we would think was disgusting or whatever. But that was how that's why the topic would be so good for a long-term episode. So we'll do our very best to get that connected. If Carol's out there, Carol, we need to do the laundry episode.
Definitely. I'll do one more, and then we can move on to some other stuff. What do we got? Oh, here we go. Other than ship's biscuit, was there any other method for preserving bread for long periods of time? Something a bit more palatable?
Well, they made rusks, and those would be, even that term biscuit really refers to a twice or three times baked bread. And they did have a leavened bread that they would bake multiple times to make this dried out sort of super dry toast that you would have as a food later on. And of course that would be let's say more chewable rather than a hard biscuit that's just dense. So that was available, and then they would really, that's about it. I mean, the idea is to dry these things out to get as much moisture away from them as possible. A dried out piece of bread that is been leavened isn't going to last as long. It's fragile, etc. That's the reason why you get something like a ship's biscuit. Beyond that, you ship the flour if for a semi long-term idea about, I want to, bread. It's not in its completely bread form, but bread does not take that much to make. You just need water, salt, flour, and yeast. That's it to make bread. So, and of course you have to have something to bake it in. So you would just ship flour if you thought that. And if you were very, very concerned, you might ship something like wheat berries that would last even longer. But generally, you would ship ship's biscuit instead. So you want that to even last longer than flour. You're going to ship ship's bread to wherever you're going to go.
I'll read a couple donations, and then you had some Patreon people you wanted to shout out?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll do this real quick. $5 from Elizabeth.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I bought a jaw harp from your website. Now I can annoy both my friends and family. Thanks.
Hey, I'm glad you're enjoying that.
Yeah. $2 from Richard. Thanks
Okay.
for the great historical content. Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
And then $10 from Max are cool. Thank
Thank you.
Yeah. You guys are making it happen shorthanded today. Thanks for the
Yeah.
determination. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we'll
not
make
a
it
problem.
happen.
Yeah, we're making it happen somehow.
So we get a lot of folks that want to help support what we do on the channel, help us make more videos, and boy, we want to make more videos. There's so many great topics out there to cover. And one of the ways people do that is to support us through Patreon. And Patreon is it's a website that it's like a way to support somebody just a little bit each month. And so we have, I don't know, 350 Patreon supporters, something like that. And the new guys this week, I have a special shout out to the new Patreon supporters this week. Elizabeth Hector, Timothy Keys, Jake, Andrea Hood, Kalina Tremblay, Joe Montgomery, Tina Burford, Randy Collins, Mike. Thank you, Mike. And just a few minutes ago, Stefan Kapal. So, new Patreon supporters, thank you so much for supporting us in that way. And really, you guys support us in so many wonderful ways. That's why we can do the videos. That's why we have so much fun. We know so many people are out there helping us out with that.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who donates.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me read a couple of quotes. Let's go back to Rude and Clamorous. Let's go back to Pope's Night or Guy Fawkes Day, Guy Fawkes Night, Bonfire Night. And let me read to you a couple of these things that were written about it. And let me see if I can find this section. Number one, the people who are rioting in these things. And there are lots and lots of references to, as they call them, the lower set of people. And who's the list of the lower set of people? Sailors. Sailors in the 18th century. Scum of the earth, apparently. It's just like, woo! These are rough guys, boisterous, violent sets of people that like to hit each other in the head, apparently. So one says, here's a piece out of the Boston Evening Post, 1745. So, the rudest and lowest sailors out of Boston fall upon each other with clubs and cutlasses in a rage and fury which only hell can inspire. What madness must seize the two mobs, united brethren even as they would appear against popery, to fall upon each other and break each other's bones and dash one another's brains out. So it doesn't make sense, does it? It's like the north side of town is against the south side of town, but they're both celebrating exactly the same thing. It just doesn't make any sense at all. In 1752, a sailor named John Crabbe was clubbed to death. It's that bad on Pope Night by another sailor. And so this Chubb guy, for his part in the killing of this other man, he was branded on the hand and then sentenced to a year in prison. Okay. I was like, okay, that's justice there.
Or they would wake up the next day and just, man, what a wild weekend.
What were we doing? And it's no wonder, if you can imagine, all these guys coming together, hitting each other, just having a riot, and all the, regular people in town. We need a law against this. We really, and this does actually bring up that idea of what are the police like in the 18th century in England and in North America, in the colonies? It's nothing like what we would expect. Nothing. They actually had to put together some constables on this night to sort of help quell these crowds, and I'm sure most of them stood by and went, I'm not getting involved in that. So there's a lot going on in this time period, and I think it's hard for us to realize just how complex and how different the life was in the colonies in the 18th century. And in some aspects, like this, it was a very rough and rude place to live. And you'll get some comments, folks traveling from England through North America during this time period, and you will get the occasional, whoa, these are a rough set of characters. Definitely. There's one other piece I really wanted to read. I'm not sure if I can find it. Here's 2 fatal accidents occurring on Pope's Night, possibly due to heavy drinking. I just hardly can imagine that. Yeah. 1735, 4 apprentices drowned while canoeing home from the bonfire night. And in 1764, a carriage bearing an effigy ran over someone and killed them. It's
best night of the year.
It's a rough celebration, and that's celebrating. I'm gonna stay off the streets.
Yeah.
The night of November 5th.
Sounds a little too rowdy for me.
A little too rowdy.
We do an Instagram contest every week.
Yeah, every week. Every week we go through the Instagram feed looking for the Townsends hashtag. So and we look for pictures that are related to 18th century things. So it could be anything, really, a historic site or some idea that somebody's got, whatever. If it's got a Townsends hashtag, maybe it's merch, maybe it's a recipe. We just go through, we look for something interesting, catches our eye, and they are the winner of the week, and we send them a gift certificate or, I don't know, something crazy. Ryan's in charge of that. I'm not sure what kind of crazy thing. But who's this week's winner? Aaron.
So the winner is Anna, I believe. I don't know how to... Anna Alaith. And I know everyone on the internet can see it, but John can't see it. So basically it's a table with period cups and utensils and bowls, and she's basically saying how awesome it is to be able to congregate and break bread with other individuals at these historic sites. It's at a historic site. I'm not sure.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I thought that was cool because I think that's what's really cool about the cooking stuff is people can sharing food with others and getting together and eating it. And she seemed to.
Thank you, Anna, for this wonderful picture and sharing it with everyone on Instagram. And I want to thank everyone who gets involved this way and participates. It's always a lot of fun to go through the feed and see these things pop up. I follow that hashtag, and it's always a lot of fun to see the different kinds of things that pop up because you never know exactly what's going to pop up. So it's a lot of fun. And that whole concept, the community aspect of reenacting, is one of the things that a lot of people are really taken aback by or excited by when they first get involved in reenacting, because it is a fairly tight-knit group and they have a lot of fun together. And so I think you can see some of that in the log barn video where these guys are working together. I mean, there's just different kinds of communities build up in different places, and it's such a wonderful set of people. And it's a great time to get together and experiment with food and share all these things that are happening and share their ideas about history and the things they've learned. It's always fun being around groups of these guys. So thank you, Anna, for that picture and that whole idea, because it's an important part of reenacting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why the cooking videos are popular. Everybody
food is such a great way to get connected. Just people that aren't necessarily super connected with history. As soon as you put together the idea of food and them, and all of a sudden, all the things start to click, and history becomes, I think history can seem kind of disconnected from us. We can't, reach it. We can't get back and touch it. So it's very abstract to us. But when we can eat history, really starts to connect the dots for us.
Okay, let's do a couple more questions. thought this was interesting. In modern times, we use polyurethane and petroleum products to protect wood from weathering.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of coatings would they have used to protect wood from the elements in the 18th century?
One of the first ones that pops up, and we've just recently, in the past couple of months, we did an episode on oilcloth, and that uses linseed oil, and linseed oil is it is the major component for oil-based paints. Linseed oil starts to do some strange polymerization thing on its own as it starts to oxidize or whatever it is. I'm not a chemistry major, but linseed oil does some incredible, interesting things and turns into paint. And it basically is oil-based paint. Really, that's one of the main ways that you can treat and protect wood. You can also, there were varnishes that were available in the time period. Shellac was available in the time period, as well as some more primitive things like waxing different items to put a finish on them, protect them from the weather. Obviously, they didn't quite probably do it as much as we do it, and they didn't have the fancy kind of chemicals that we have, so it may not work as well. They also had milk-based paint, and that worked on a kind of a whole different kind of, aspect. They had some really very interesting technologies, as well as something like, let's say, whitewash, which is a lime-based paint kind of product, and that's probably very similar to the milk paints of the time period. What else has Aaron got for me? He's back there clicking away, so he's
I got
working
a few,
hard.
but there's some that are pretty interesting. I want to see what you think about this one.
Okay, go for it.
Why isn't there more fiction in the 18th century? Aside from a few classics, you don't really see much fiction with the backdrop of the Revolution or early colonial America. Why do you think that is?
The why on fiction,
or lack of?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a really good, interesting topic. And when you do find fiction, it is sort of really out of the ordinary. It is prototypical, and I think that's maybe where you go with that. That the idea of fiction wasn't nearly as much in people's minds. I don't think they had the same kind of thought process as we do, and we're used to lots and lots of fiction, and they weren't. So
because I think,
go ahead,
like Frankenstein, Dracula, stuff like that, all that was
19th century.
Yeah, so it's almost like it was right after kind of the time period that we specialize in, where you started seeing more. Even Washington Irving with Sleepy Hollow, that was written in the 19th century.
That's the Romantic era, and you see all these things happening both in all the different kinds of arts. And when you study arts, you see these different ages coming, kind of moving through history. And that Romantic period, Impressionist painting, the literature does that. You go back in time, and it morphs into something completely different, and you don't see as much fiction, but it's there. There are seeds of that. Of course, we got things like Gulliver's Travels. If we go back, we can do Bunyan, and we see, that very, very important work. It's just not popping into my head right this second.
I think it doesn't seem as fantastic as some of that 19th century stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Gulliver's Travels seems more grounded, even though it's not at all.
Well, it's pretty crazy stuff happening in Gulliver's Travels. But Pilgrim's Progress is another one of those, there's fiction. We get to see the start of romantic fiction and Clarissa and the Pamela, I think, happening in the 18th century. And apparently just found it today because I normally don't look at fiction. It's a strange topic that pops into my head, but apparently there's a Gothic novel that gets written in 1798 or so. So I just ordered that today. So we'll see. Because people were asking about Halloween, and I was just, there's just not that much. People aren't thinking that way. They've got a totally different mindset. So there's a lot. We take all these kinds of things for granted as we sit in our spot of history about what people are interested in and what they do. And you go backwards in time, and we think it's obvious, and it just is not obvious.
Gulliver's Travels was satire.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
but it was still
crazy ideas,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
he's writing it down. He could have been satirical, and he was satirical in other ways that was much more grounded, like talking about the Irish or whatever. But his description and the things he's talking about are pretty fantastical, if that's a word.
Hey, John, can we get a special Ghost Story Halloween episode? We are talking about that.
Right, but again,
Definitely.
there's not much to work with,
Yeah.
so we're going to do our best.
I think for that one, it could almost be like old folklore, not necessarily.
Yeah, but
story.
even then,
that,
they're very, very grounded folks, and
just the time period, I think.
Yeah.
Things were still getting kind of settled in. After that is when,
in some ways, they are. We might consider them very superstitious, but in other ways, they are very, very not superstitious. Especially that New England, they're very, down to earth folks, and so that just they just don't go there.
Right.
That really is a 19th century thing.
yeah, I thought that was a great question. I kind of had to think about it. Like,
Yeah.
I get what you mean.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm sure there's probably a book this thick on the topic.
Yeah, there might be. But as far as famous fictional stories during the 1700s, not.
Yeah, there's a little bit, but it is very like trying to find, Jane Austen. There are roots of Jane Austen in the 18th century, but she comes on the fore and writes those kinds of things, and it's totally mind blowing. It's totally different than what people are used to.
Yeah. Sleepy Hollow is 19th century. Yeah. But it was based in.
Yeah, even though they're talking about colonial time period, or
Well-
you'll see that the subject might be, but the time it was written.
Well, this person even said the backdrop of fiction it's the 18th century being the backdrop as well. I think that's a little more common.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's a cool topic. We'll do.
So you're getting Aaron excited back there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. See, now I'm having to.
Now I'm making him work hard back there.
Yeah. What were colonial weddings like?
That whole idea of the romanticism and what we think of as weddings, and they're going to be a lot simpler. And when you read about this Wednesday's video had to do with the William Byrd expedition, where they go and they survey the line between North Carolina and Virginia. And something that's related is Wood Mason's journal, where he's talking about going into the backcountry in the 1760s. Similar location, similar concepts here, because Byrd decides that he's got a fairly large group of folks, the commissioners, the surveyor folks, and all these backwoodsmen, and he asks Virginia and North Carolina to also support sending a clergyman along with them. He says, the group I've got here is a body, and they need to be served by clergy as we go back into the wilderness. And while we're going back into the wilderness, we can give clergy services to those people in the backwoods. And one of the things he's talking about is blessing of weddings or blessing of marriages. And Wood Mason speaks of exactly the same thing. And then he relates, I think they both relate the idea that not that many people were excited about saying, oh, I'm going to go ahead and get married because the preacher's in town, right? Because they could get married in a civil sense by local magistrates. And so they did that to the vast majority of the time. The people did not connect getting married as much or worry about having big ceremonies at the time, especially in this backwoods setting. They were trying to live, and they really weren't. You don't hear that much about weddings per se. They may have had, kind of rowdy, rude, and clamorous get-togethers when they had weddings, but you don't hear about the pomp and circumstance of a wedding in the 18th century, at least in North America and the time period that I've run into.
Yeah. I'm going to do some donations, and then we'll do something else. $10 from Francis Wallace. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
€2 from Der Garten Labyrinth.
You're really challenging him now.
This day has been brutal. What type of musket do you have on the wall? We'll do the donations. I'll
go ahead.
Questions. Yeah. €5 from Timothy Keys.
Thank you, Timothy.
Yeah, I'm pretty. That's euro. I'm learning the different signage. We just made our first beeswax salve yesterday. Do you know of any fun period home remedies we can try out to get ready for the bitter Slovak winter? And then we'll do
remedies.
A couple more.
Okay.
This is pounds. $4.99 from Martha Stewart.
Martha Stewart again.
Yeah, I'm so honored. Love your channel. By the way, not the real Martha.
Aww.
And then $4.99 from Scott Jacoby. Thanks for answering my question. A follow-up. Why don't you think modern authors, screenwriters, etc. pay much attention to the 18th century? Okay, thank you everyone for the donations.
Yeah, thanks all of you.
Yeah. Okay, so first off, the musket on the wall.
That, if you go back to the live stream where my father was in the guest chair, that is a gun that, it's a Civil War musket that as a kid, my father was intrigued by that gun. That's the gun that's actually sort of the seeds of James Townsend and Son. That got him interested in history and in muzzle-loading guns, and that sort of led to the start of the business, etc. So that is a family
heirloom.
Yeah, family heirloom, Civil War musket.
Okay, and then the home remedies for the winter.
Yeah, there were a lot of the 18th century cookbooks are filled in the back with home remedies because there weren't a lot of doctors. There weren't a lot of doctors you could trust, and they were all very expensive. And so home remedies were common. It was what the woman in the household was expected to be able to serve as a doctor, at least, in a small way, right? And so cookbooks would have these remedy sections in them. There are some interesting salves in there. There are many things that would be poisonous or dangerous to us today, and we would not use them as a medicine. And there are also some very, very interesting pharmacological books that we dig in. There's one down in the library. I think it's Quincy's book on medicines, and it has a lot of interesting simples. These would probably be simple salves that we would put together using sweet oil, which would be olive oil. You'd add something like beeswax, some other oils, so we get it into a salve type consistency, and then put in different kinds of herbs, even barks and roots and all kinds of interesting things might show up in a particular salve. And something that shows up a lot in the 18th century that, at least here in North America, you don't ever hear about, and that is poultices. Those show up a whole bunch in those kind of home remedies, really interesting ways of healing that we've sort of left it by the wayside, and I'm not sure that we shouldn't go back to a certain extent. And there was one other question. What was it?
It was a follow-up to the fiction discussion. Why don't you think modern authors and screenwriters, etc.,
like the time period,
or pay attention?
Yeah, pay attention.
I don't know.
Well, obviously, there's something like the Hamilton thing that's really, gotten very, very big, and a lot of, interest in that. But I'm not sure. The 18th century, I think, in a lot of ways, because it's so, we've stereotyped it 1776, and we forget. We've forgotten all the nuances and the interesting things that are happening within the 18th century. It is more difficult to grasp these concepts, and so it's more difficult for authors to go back and do the research and get it really, really done well. So that's one of the reasons, I think, is because it's not as easy. There are some very interesting authors that work within the time period. One of my very, very favorite authors works within the early 19th century time period, but that's the Patrick O'Brien series about naval things, British naval things I think some of them are as early as 1790s, and most of them are all through the Napoleonic Wars. He does an excellent job of portraying that time period. More could be done, and is being done. Several different people talk about researching for doing historical fiction for that time period, and there's some really, really interesting topics. It's just it's not easy. It's not nearly as easy.
$10 from Keltoid 5.
There you are.
Can't think of a question right now, but I'll donate anyway.
Thank you so much, Keltoid 5.
Are you talking more like the writing things into law on the foundation of the country, where it's like people talking about, some of the political discussion that was happening at the time? Like, is that more of what, that's kind of hard to make into a...
well, I think they
translate.
I think it's just the idea of how do we know enough, how does an author know enough about life in the 18th century to make something realistic, and not get it wrong, and not get it stereotyped and too obvious. There are some works of fiction there. Johnny Tremain, something like that. It's a really good, really fun book. I read that with Ivy earlier this summer, and it's a fun book that kind of is working within this time period. But it's because we're not as familiar with it, it's hard work for an author to go back and research it and feel comfortable about saying, yeah, I can really write, and feel like I know what the 18th century is really like, especially in North America.
Yeah. Oh, someone said Frankenstein was 1797. I thought it was later than that. So I guess that's technically 18th century. Okay. We're getting close to the end.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That mug looks just amazing.
This mug?
Yeah.
I think Aaron's trying to draw my attention toward this. So the
You're
nutmeg...
supposed to do it without saying anything.
Yeah. We've so enjoyed putting together this whole Nutmeg Tavern theme. We really thought it was fun. What we do in a live stream is something different than, regular videos. And even regular videos, they kind of have that back and forth of comments. But when we're doing it live, it's something very, very different, and something almost akin to what was happening with taverns in the 18th century, and that loud and boisterous environment, and a lot of back and forth. So we had a lot of fun putting together this concept, and so the mugs are an outgrowth of that. We said, once we put together the Nutmeg Tavern, this tavern has to have its own mugs. So these mugs are available. There's a very limited quantity of these guys. I don't want to have 1,000 mugs sitting around all the time. So I just put together small batches of these. They're made for us. They're handmade. They're made in the United States. They do a tremendous job of glazing these. They're beautiful mugs, and they put these the logos on the front of them, or the designs on the front of them, just like they would have done in the 18th century. So we've got these wonderful mugs available. Aaron's put a link. I don't normally, when these mugs become available, they only last like a couple days. So if you really want one, make sure to check it out. Now's the time. And each one of these, I can't turn it upside down or I would pour stuff on them, but I'm going to sign all the mugs that go out here on this this weekend. So if you order up a mug, it's gonna have a John signature on the bottom of it. I want to really. Do you have any other things?
Let me do one more donation,
Okay,
and then we can get out of here.
Okay.
$20 from Caitlin.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks
For supporting what we do here.
Yes.
And again, Caitlin support us with Super Chat. And a lot we talked about the new folks that supported us through Patreon. Special thanks to you guys, as well as everyone out there who watches our videos. You're supporting what we do. When you comment, when you watch our videos, when you share our videos, all that is special. It helps us create more videos. You guys are the reasons why we can do videos at all. I mean, I could just stay in a closet and research and have fun, but there's nothing like sharing it with you guys. So I so much enjoy videos, so much enjoy sharing it with you guys. Thank you so much for all you do, and thanks for watching today.